Hello and welcome to the 30th installment of the Galen Data Medical Device Innovation Webinar Series. I'll be your host today, Dwayne Mancini. I'm the CEO at Project MedTech. Today we'll be hearing from Isabella Schmidt at Proxima on reducing AI risk to secure regulatory approval. First, a few housekeeping slides and some information on Galen Data. Galen Data is an FDA compliant cloud for medical device manufacturers. The Galen Cloud provides a configurable platform for device to cloud connectivity that is compliant to FDA, HIPAA, and CE mark standards. The company is ISO 13485 certified, and the product on AWS is high trust certified as well. Founded by seasoned medical device professionals, the company's goal is to make medical device cloud connectivity available to all at a fraction of the cost while shaving months off the development timeline. Galen Data allows medical device companies to stay medical device companies and not become IT companies. Some quick logistics here. If you have questions, feel free to drop them on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a spot for questions there. You can ask questions throughout the webinar. If they're pertinent, might plug them into Isabella's presentation. If not, we'll save them for the end and get them asked then. There's also some handouts over here to the right-hand side as well. So you'll see a Galen Data informational sheet and also a white paper. And then as a reminder, you will receive a recording of this webinar via email, and feel free to follow up with us should you have any additional questions. With that being said, Isabella, the virtual floor is all yours.
All right, tell me if I'm doing this right, Dwayne. Are you double seeing everything right now? Are you seeing my slide?
I am seeing your slides. You're all good.
Okay, cool. So I told Dwayne this. I'm going to say hello to everyone at the start. Once we get into the presentation, I'm gonna go off just to preserve bandwidth so that there are hopefully no issues. And without further ado, who am I? So if you don't know me, my name is Isabella Schmidt. I work at a company called Proxima, as Dwayne mentioned. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Proxima. I've worked with, it says over 100 plus, it's probably 200 plus now. That was a couple of years ago. So we work with a lot of different medical device products. We work with some biotech products as well. I have a background in regulatory quality and clinical. A lot of the products that we worked with on the MedTech side have had some form of software or AI within those products, or have been strictly AI software products as well. So this is kind of like a pet interest of mine. And then just as a note, if you guys had noticed, this was supposed to kick off last week. And I've had a little bit of trouble with my dog that I've had for 16 years has been sick. So I apologize if this has like messed up your schedule. I just focusing on that a little bit, send her well wishes and hope that she gets better. And then now I'm gonna go off screen and I will see you guys back at the end. Okay. It would change. Okay, so what we're going to discuss today is we're going to discuss artificial intelligence in medical devices, some of the challenges and risks that we face with artificial intelligence in medical devices, and bias, transparency, monitoring, and then the various stakeholders that you have when you're developing an artificial intelligence device. All right, so if you're here, you probably have some idea of what AI in medical devices looks like, or AI as a medical device looks like. So we're talking about computer systems in general. AI is computer systems that can perform tasks that would typically require human intelligence to perform them, or maybe sometimes even beyond human intelligence. They can analyze data, they can recognize speech, they can make decisions, they can solve problems, they can do a whole litany of things. And so we're trying to nowadays incorporate them into our medical devices and into our healthcare systems to streamline the processes. We've been incorporating them about since the early 2000s, and it's just, been exponentially increasing the involvement of AI in medical devices since. So what do we see when we are, what do we see when we see AI medical devices? So what type of devices are we talking about? We're talking about diagnostic imaging. So a lot of the devices that have been FDA cleared to date have been in the diagnostic imaging space. So this is AI that's analyzing medical images, detecting anomalies, supporting diagnosis. We're talking about health monitoring. So if you think of your Apple Watch, if you have, I think it's like version 5 or later, you might have that ECG, and it'll tell you hold your finger on the crown. So that is using AI to analyze different factors, including your heart rate and your pulse waveform, to determine if you may have, AFib. We're looking at robotic surgery. So everybody's probably familiar with the Da Vinci. This helps with, precision and detecting human error and kind of course correcting those things. And then of course, a lot of medical devices are doing risk assessment. So this is sort of taking in multiple data points and multiple factors of a patient situation and giving them some sort of specific risk score associated with their medical condition. Next slide, will you stop? All right, so what are some of the challenges that we have for AI in medical devices? Some of them are similar to just regular devices, right? So you want to have good data quality, you want to minimize bias, you want to have, this is not in regular devices, but algorithmic complexity is a challenge with AI. Data privacy and security, that's always a challenge, but it's particular with AI when we talk about, and we'll get into this transparency a bit. Regulatory compliance, that's always a hurdle that everybody has to climb in the medical device space. Adoption and understanding of the AI, so understanding what it's doing, its limitations, and then we have ethical considerations with AI. As we've seen, there have been some challenges with bias associated with AI based on its training set. All right, so on that note, we'll start getting into bias, which is one of the biggest areas that we've probably heard a lot about. All right, so what is bias in AI? So bias in AI, there are systematic errors in the outputs generated by the algorithm. And so these can occur when it's trained on unrepresentative, skewed, or incomplete data. So when we talk about unrepresentative data, I'm talking too fast. We're talking about when the training data does not properly represent the diverse population. So it could not represent their medical conditions, it could not represent their demographic factors, any relevant factors that the AI may encounter in the real world. The training data set may not have been representative of those. Skewed data, we're talking about the over/under representation of certain groups or conditions. So this can lead to those bias predictions that we've mentioned. So if a data set, for example, is used to train an AI algorithm for diagnosing a particular disease, and it consists of a disproportionately high number of samples from one age group or one ethnicity or one comorbidity, the data would then be considered skewed. Imbalance in AI, we can also talk about imbalance in AI, which can result in overrepresented groups while performing poorly in underrepresented groups. So you might have biased predictions and recommendations that can potentially ultimately affect the quality of care for those patients. If we're talking about incomplete data, we're talking about data where the information is just completely missing. So this could be because of data entry errors or data entry mistakes or just the unavailability of data. And if those variables are important to the AI, then you would get an inaccurate or biased prediction. And skewed and incomplete are subsets of unrepresentative data. So if they sound kind of redundant with unrepresentative data, that's because unrepresentative data is really a broader concept of which these are subparts. And so why are we concerned about bias in AI? As I mentioned when I was describing the different types of bias that can occur, ultimately it's because it will result in incorrect diagnoses, incorrect treatment recommendations, which can then hurt patient care as opposed to help it. If it's not representative in, for example, minority groups or certain socioeconomic groups, it can exacerbate those health disparities that we may see. And ultimately, if a physician or a patient is getting some output from AI and they don't feel that it's accurate, they'll lose trust in the AI. All right, so the main causes of bias, as I mentioned, can be data imbalance, right? So that's when we're looking at the underrepresentation or the overrepresentation. For underrepresentation, we have the poor performance in those groups, and maybe better performance in the overrepresented groups. Another cause of bias is the data quality issues. And so this can occur when the training data is inaccurate. It could be outdated or inconsistent data, and this will affect the AI's ability to make the reliable predictions that you're depending on. So data quality issues, as I mentioned, could be something like data entry mistakes, data errors, missing values, and these would introduce those inaccuracies in the data set. And if it's within the training data set, then this can propagate those errors throughout the algorithm, which would then kind of snowball into effect of these inaccurate or unreliable performance. Other data quality issues could be kind of related back to the data imbalance a little bit too. So you might have different healthcare professionals, because you're looking at a subset of hospitals, for example, that you're training in, or a subset of hospitals. And so based on the methodologies or the interpretations that they use at those hospitals or those physicians are using, you may start influencing your data set, and it could lead to incorrect labeling or contradictions in labeling in the real world, and that would affect the performance of the AI. And then finally, we have algorithmic limitation, and so this would be because of erroneous or inappropriate feature selection or model design. So basically, you might be thinking of something like where you're emphasizing certain features that could lead to a biased prediction if the features that you're selecting as important are not really justified as important clinically. And then the other challenge with an algorithm is to balance its complexity. So you don't want an algorithm that's overly complex, which would make it difficult for humans to understand how the algorithm works and what it's doing, and could also, overly complex algorithms may overfit to its training data. But you also don't want it to be overly simplistic so that it doesn't really adequately capture the patterns that it's seeing in the data sets. So consequences of bias, as I mentioned before, obviously misdiagnosis is a big one. If you're getting erroneous results, that could be a big deal, particularly if you're talking about a life-threatening condition or disease state such as heart failure or cancer or AFib or any of those types of things. Bias can also result in unequal access to care or unequal care. So if the algorithm has been trained in certain groups, it may disproportionately benefit those groups and not other groups, which would then perpetuate those health disparities that we're trying to eliminate. And then ultimately, bias can lead to less accurate algorithms overall, which would reduce the effectiveness of the medical device in general. So what can you do? So you're going to want to obviously detect the bias, right? So how can you do that? So you can use a few different techniques. Stats is always a great place to start. So you can use things like hypothesis testing, where you're seeing if there's a significant difference between different subgroups within your patient population. So this might you might be looking at different cohorts of age, so grouping them as, like say 10 to 30 and 30 to 50, and then comparing those groups. You might look at different comorbidities, you may look at different race groups or ethnicities, different genders, things like that, and compare them to see if there are actually differences, statistically significant differences. You could also do some visualization techniques. So basically you would do like a distribution plot to see the demographics and how your data is representative or not representative of those demographic groups. You could also do this to compare the accuracy within those groups. So maybe you generate, depending on how much data you have, you can do sort of like heat maps that can compare the error rates within certain groups. You know, again, separating those subgroups into age and ethnicity and things like that. And you can also do distribution plots for those. There's also model interpretability techniques. So you can use like chat values and partial dependence plots and feature importance analysis. So you can do like permutation importance, where you can see the relative importance of those different inputs on the AI model's prediction. And if you're not familiar with like chat values, they're basically, they explain the output of the model by explaining the value that you give to each specific feature prediction. So it kind of allows you to understand the different factors that went into that prediction and the various weights on them. And then another big way to minimize bias in AI is to really have a diverse team. And this is really true for risk management of any medical device. You really want a good group of engineers and scientists and clinicians and regulatory folks to identify and address what could be potential biases in AI. And so having a diverse team allows for, you know, multiple perspectives with different domain expertise, so they're coming from different angles, and then they can provide, you know, unique insights. If you have a group that's just all the product development engineers, you're going to be looking through one lens. If you have a group that's just clinicians, you're going to be looking through a different lens. So you really want to make sure that you have a diverse group for any type of risk management, but particularly with AI. And then you also get the opportunity to collaborate. You get collaborative problem solving, so you may be able to bounce ideas off of one another, realize different potential areas for bias, and then kind of come up with some solutions for addressing those areas of bias. All right. So next we're going to talk about how to do the addressing of the bias. So so there are a few different ways that you can address the bias. You can do data collection and curation, you can do algorithmic improvements, and you can do testing and evaluation. So data collection and curation, you're going to want to gather data from a broad variety of sources. So when we say that, you know, you may be using data from an EMR, you may be using images. So say you have a technology that is using ultrasound images, you'll probably want to get a good variety of ultrasound technologies from different manufacturers to ensure that your algorithm is truly generalizable across all ultrasound. If you don't do that, you're likely to be limited to whatever ultrasound technology you have used for the training and validation of your product. When you file a regulatory submission, you're going to want to explain what devices you used and how you collected the data and what the data that the algorithm was trained on actually looks like, and, you know, also what your validation data looks like. So you'll also want to be sure that you're balancing the data that you're collecting. So this is a part of that sort of curation procedure. You want to ensure that it's representative, as we mentioned, of the patient population that you're targeting. So if you're looking at your group of data for training and for validation, and you're seeing that you're having a large number of, you know, one ethnic group, so that it's the majority group, you may employ a few different techniques like oversampling or undersampling to address that disparity. So If you're looking at undersampling, you're going to say, okay, I have this majority group. Let's say the majority group is white. You have the majority group and you need to reduce the number so that it is not overestimating towards the white population, such that it's more accurate in that population and less accurate in the minority group populations. And so suppose if you have a low number of Native Americans, you'll want to then oversample that group. So you're going to look for opportunities to include more of that patient population to really get a representative data set. You can also clean and pre-process the data. So that's, some of those data management techniques, making sure that you're filling in missing values, that you're normalizing the data, that nothing seems really erroneous in what you're looking at. For algorithmic improvements, we mentioned these before, but you're going to be looking at ways that you can improve the accuracy and fairness. And so what you ultimately end up doing is going to be dependent on the algorithm that you're exactly working with. So you can think about things like regularization, my goodness. That gives the algorithm, ideas of what it should be focusing on instead of, sometimes algorithms will look for efficiencies and they'll start to try to take shortcuts, for example, and they'll start really honing in on certain steps, which then can accumulate and lead to these biases. So you'll basically give it course correction, right? And say, no, don't do that. Think about the underhand, the underlying logic here. You won't exactly say that, but you'll program it to do that. And so that it's not really, focusing on specific steps that could ultimately lead it to have erroneous assumptions. And then obviously testing and evaluation. So this is true for any medical device. You're going to want to test your product. You're going to want to make sure that you establish clear evaluation criteria for it. For an algorithm, you might be looking at accuracy, sensitivity, specificity, PPV, and what you'll need to focus on is the intended use of your algorithm, right? So that will help you determine what those evaluation and acceptance criteria should be, and also the intended patient population that you're trying to target. And then you can also be sure to continuously monitor your AI, and conduct regular audits on your AI. So we'll get into monitoring a little bit more, but this is to make sure that once you've deployed your AI out into the real world, that you're not seeing shifts, that it's actually keeping up with the clinical situation, and doing, sort of regular QC quality control checks on the AI to make sure that it's performing as expected and it's still meeting the evaluation criteria that you established before. All right, so moving on to how to improve, so moving on from bias to transparency in AI. And transparency in AI is important for a number of different factors. We really want to establish trust and confidence in the AI. And we really want to make sure that both physicians, for any stakeholders, physicians, regulators, patients, understand what's going on in the AI and what the outputs are actually telling us. So when we talk about making an AI more transparent, we're talking about providing clear and understandable outputs for its decision-making process, what it takes as data inputs, and what it then outputs. And as I said, it'll help, get trust and confidence in the AI, and it'll also help in holding, the AI accountable, so that, and the appropriate parties that are training the AI are held accountable, so that issues that come up with the AI can be addressed promptly. So as with anything, there are some challenges associated with it. So basically, the challenges consist of complex algorithms, right? So as we move into the medical space, we often are looking at algorithms that can be difficult to interpret and explain because they take, wide or large data sets, and you're probably applying some sort of deep learning neural network like a CNN or an ANN to it to interpret it. And explaining the inner workings of an algorithm like that is very difficult, particularly in a way that humans can understand. And then because we're entering in the age of AI, there's a lack of standardization in what we need to do to show that an algorithm is, how to show transparency in AI, right? So how to explain the algorithm in a way that is understandable. What data do you need to present? And that can make it difficult for developers, and it also makes it difficult for the people that are trying to interpret that information. So we're still working through, the expectations of what FDA might be looking for, because we're in sort of a new arena, right? And they don't have a lot of past precedent to fall back on. And so this can make it challenging for them to feel comfortable with the data that they have and to give appropriate feedback to the developers of the AI. And for the devices that have been out there for, the device types that have been out there for a while that incorporate AI, looking at sort of some of the radiologic devices, there's a better understanding of what those expectations are. But as we look into more de novo submissions and more PMA submissions, there's probably going to be a bit more of a back and forth in how and what information FDA expects to see. There's also a challenge in IP, right? So there's a couple of different IP related issues here associated with AI and medical devices specifically. One is that a lot of the data that you're having to input into these systems is sensitive information, it's patient information. And so there's parameters around which you can really be truly transparent about the AI. And so you have to go through and be very careful about that, because you don't want to raise privacy concerns that would violate something like HIPAA. And you also need to be, make sure that you have appropriate data security around whatever information that you may be sharing. And then because the AI is your baby, right, you're probably going to be a little bit hesitant to share a lot of the details of your algorithm, the data sources, the methodologies you use, because you don't want someone else stealing your intellectual property. You want to maintain that competitive edge. And you also, as if you're not the CEO, you want to be careful that you're not giving away trade secrets. And so those are some of the challenges to addressing the issues with transparency in AI. I'm so sorry, I cannot talk today. So as I mentioned before, briefly, why do we care about transparency? Well, we want to establish trust and confidence. We want to promote accountability by making it clear how the AI is making its decisions. And that can alleviate the concerns about the readability and the interpretability of the outputs of the AI for the physicians or patients. And we want to make sure that we are engaging in continuous improvement and learning. So the more we understand about what the AI is doing and how it's making the decisions, the more we can identify areas where we can improve the AI to address the issues with bias, to refine its decision-making process, to make it more accurate, to update the data inputs. If we, said, okay, this feature is important and we were wrong about that, we can then go back and address those things. And the more that a patient or a physician understands about what the AI is telling it, the more empowered they can be in interpreting the decision and using the tool. And this is particularly true with patients. So if patients understand how an AI is giving them information, they're better to be or to take part in their own care. If they don't really understand how that decision was made, that can cause distress for them to, rely on the AI. But it also doesn't educate them in a way that allows them to really truly learn more about their condition and learn more about what is going into their care decisions. All right, so how do we achieve transparency in AI? All right, so well, one way is to obviously have more interpretable models. So developing AI that is more interpretable can make it easier to understand and explain how the system arrived at its predictions or decisions. So you can use things like global interpretability, which would provide an overview of how the model operates, or local interpretability, which gives an insight to individual predictions that the model has made. There's also data provenance and documentation. So as with any medical device, you're going to hear a lot about documentation. And so data provenance and documentation basically says, give clear information on the data sources, how you process them, how you pre-process them in the training data, and that can help promote transparency into how the algorithm works. So you can include information on the origin of the data, the quality of the data, the methods used to select the data, the methods used to pre-process the data, any modifications made to the data during the process. And then metadata management is another way that you can help with data provenance and documentation. So you can tag metadata, such as like the provenance of specific sets of data, the lineage, the quality metrics associated with them, and that'll allow you to better track the quality of the data to ensure that that data is being used appropriately. As with anything, clear communication and decision making. So you want to provide clear and understandable information about how the device works to promote output transparency. So this can involve providing clear explanations of the reasoning behind the predictions made behind the AI system, and then provide information on the accuracy and reliability of the system. Providing clear documentation, sorry, my voice is like going out. Providing clear documentation on the design and the implementation of the AI can include information on like the algorithmic choices that you've made, the parameters that you use, the methods used to evaluate the system's performance. So what are you using for validation? What did you use for your test set? How did you train the algorithm? Really providing clear documentation of everything that you've done and every step that you took to train and validate this AI so that it is accurate within the real world setting beyond just what you've done for validation and training. You can also use visualization and user interfaces. So this is for the physician and the patient's end, right? So if you have pretty user-friendly interfaces that help them understand the output, you can use like summaries and visualization to help, like, visualizations meaning like graphs or charts or anything that can help them understand how the AI came to its predictions. And then obviously, if you have an intended user and you have various stakeholders that are going to have some sort of feeling or sway or position in what you're doing, engaging with them is always smart. So you can engage with your physician, you can engage with patients, you can engage with patients' advocacy groups, and you can engage with regulators. As always with medical devices, we'll say engage with FDA early and often. That's particularly true for medical devices. You also want to make sure that you're beyond getting information back from them, you want to make sure that you're adequately educating them on your system and how it works, so that any thing that they might want to see or any questions that they may have, you're able to answer, particularly before you get into whatever submission that you're going to be giving them, whether it's a 510K, a de novo, or a PMA. And then obviously having an interdisciplinary team as part of the development process helps with addressing some of these concerns on the front end and understanding what you need to educate FDA or any other stakeholders on the back end, so that you can really have more meaningful conversations. And then there's the opportunity to have open source models, and you really want to be able to establish reproducible research. So you don't, with anything with science, you don't want it to be unintelligible, or you don't want it to be such that someone else is not able to reproduce what you have generated with your algorithm. All right, so we'll go through a little bit of an example case, and this is probably the most used one because it was one of the first types of devices that were cleared out there. But we'll go through an example case of an ophthalmology device that's used for diabetic retinopathy. And so the AI-based medical device analyzes the retinal images, and it'll identify early signs of diabetic retinopathy. So in the case of making this device transparent, the developers will use a combination of decision trees. And so decision trees and rule-based systems are a little bit easier to understand because it kind of flows through that hierarchy of decisions. And so you can follow how the AI made the decision that it made. And then you can then explain that to healthcare professionals and the FDA, so that, or anybody, so that one can interpret how and can kind of follow to conclude that they would have come up to the same decision as the AI. You can also the AI developers also did clear communication and decision making. So criteria and rules were established for the algorithm, and they were documented thoroughly. So say in this particular case, we're looking at the presence or absence of lesions. This was documented so that other individuals understood, okay, we're looking at the presence and absence of lesions, and that is how this AI is making its decision. It might display on the user interface the AI model's decision boundaries. So it can say we ranked lesions as the highest important, so that a physician looking at it knows what is the basis for what the diagnosis that the device is giving. And you really want to establish acceptance criteria based on clinical relevance for the algorithm, and you want to document that performance. So that looks like your validation data set, your clinical validation. This developer also worked with various stakeholders and collaborated with them to ensure that it was developing the right type of product. And so it had an interdisciplinary team of researchers, clinicians, patients, regulatory folks, and it met with FDA early and often to clear up any confusion and make sure that it was engaging in the appropriate testing and validation for the product. All right, so now we're going to move into monitoring. Okay, so monitoring in the context of AI medical devices refers to the continuous assessment, or like the ongoing process of collecting and analyzing the data to evaluate the performance and the safety of the device once it's moved into the real world setting. So we're really talking about that sort of post-market surveillance that we're engaging in to make sure that the AI is still performing the way we expected, that it's still maintaining the levels of accuracy and effectiveness, and that we're identifying any potential issues or areas of improvement before they kind of snowball into an issue. And so why are we interested in monitoring? Obviously, we want to make sure that the device is safe and effective, and that, as I said, we're finding and addressing any biases or potential issues that could arise in the real world setting that we didn't anticipate in the validation because we thought we had a representative data set. We also want to just continuously improve the AI in general, right? So once we get real world data, or we're getting feedback from various stakeholders, physicians, patients, etc., we can make changes to the device if the medical knowledge in the world changes. So if the standard of best patient care or the best practices changes, we want to make sure that the AI is updated in accordance with that. And when we monitor the AI, we can really understand more about the AI so that we can establish trust and confidence in the AI system for the various stakeholders that are going to be using that AI. And we can establish that it's still reliable, it's still performing as intended, that we're not having any issues that could affect patient care. So there are various types of monitoring that you can do. I actually gave another talk on AI a while ago, and someone asked me about monitoring techniques, and I think it was maybe a very specific question, or I didn't understand the way the question was worded, but there are various monitoring techniques that you can use. Some are easier than others, and here are a few examples of what you can do. All right, so you can use model performance techniques, right? So this can kind of mimic what you do in development. So you can do supervised monitoring or unsupervised monitoring. So supervised monitoring would look like monitoring the AI performance against a known set of data and inputs and outputs. Sorry. So this can help to make sure that the model is still performing as expected. It's still meeting and making the accurate predictions and decisions. Unsupervised monitoring can use the techniques like clustering, principal component analysis, and this will help identify patterns and trends in the data that you're seeing, which can help in identification of potential issues or anomalies in the algorithm's performance. And then once you identify those, you can further investigate them. User interaction or human factors, right? So you're gonna, in the real world, and even before you move to the real world, you're gonna collect and analyze feedback from the various stakeholders. So from healthcare professionals and patients and anybody who may be using the AI system, you can, solicit feedback from them to understand where you can improve, where they're having issues, are they satisfied? And in receiving that feedback, then you can work on improving the AI to further meet their needs. Another way you can look at it is actually tracking user behavior. And so these two around users are really similar in all medical devices, right? So you really want to collect product feedback once you get to the market to identify any potential trends and issues with any type of medical device to improve the user experience and or address any things that can cause safety or effectiveness issues. And user behavior tracking is another way of doing that. And so sometimes what you're going to be looking at is the frequency of when they're using the device, how often they're using the device, what types of things they're using the device for, and then you're going to get recommendations from them again. And if you understand the user's behavior, you can understand how effective it is in the real world and if the users are trusting that device. And if they aren't trusting the device, you can solicit feedback as to why they are not. If they're using it in ways that were unanticipated, you can address that, or you may be able to find a new avenue of use for your device. And then in general, system reliability and safety, you can look for failure mode analysis. So this would be like fault trees or FMEAs, which you would do continuously with any device. And then anomaly detection. So things that you didn't expect, or system failures or bugs or anything like that, you'll be looking for those. So again, there are some challenges associated with monitoring too. So data quality and availability. So with monitoring, particularly in the healthcare space, it's hard to gather high quality, large data sets, particularly when you're in the real world setting, and things can be done differently between different hospitals, and data may be missing, or they may not be collecting some data pieces that could cause the reason for it being missing. They may have inconsistencies in their procedures. They may be calling things, use different terminology. And then there may just be privacy concerns associated with the ability to access that data. So obtaining data is one challenge. Interpretability of really highly complex models can present a challenge in monitoring, because it's hard to one, establish transparency as much as you can with less complex models, such that the users can provide feedback on where they think there may be issues in the logic of the AI. But it also might be harder for a developer to figure out where a potential issue is. A challenge of monitoring is the rapid evolution of medical knowledge and standards. So keeping up to date with what is best practices or state of the art in the clinical space for whatever area the AI is being used in, and updating the AI accordingly can be really challenging. And that's not necessarily, a specific challenge associated with the ability to monitor, but it's a challenge with the ability to address the things that you're seeing in monitoring. Expectations from a regulatory perspective are still evolving. So there really, as I mentioned before, isn't a clear standard of how to make something transparent, how to monitor something. And as we get more devices out into the market, there may be changes based upon what we learn as these devices move into the real world. And then for a small company, monitoring can be challenging because of time and personnel and infrastructure established. It can be pretty costly. And so just from a resourcing perspective, it can be very costly in following up and addressing the challenges that you're seeing, putting processes in place for that monitoring. And so these are some of the things that can prevent adequate monitoring from occurring in the real world. So what are some techniques that you can employ? You can use real-time data analysis. So you can actually put algorithms in place to help monitor. You can use statistical processes and signal processing techniques. And in doing these things, you'll basically be able to more quickly identify issues that occur. As I mentioned before, you can have feedback loops, so users and developers can provide continuous feedback. So if a physician is seeing an issue, they can provide that feedback to you. You can keep track of it. You can see if it is actually an issue that is recurring, or if it's a significant issue, address it immediately. Developers can continuously look at the algorithm to make sure, to further improve it, to make sure that it's still meeting its acceptance criteria. Anomaly detection, so you can establish, rule-based systems to say if something is out of the norm, for example, as a result, so it doesn't quite jive with what is a typical output, that this might be, you know, addressed as sort of like a outside of the specific rules and parameters that one would see. And then you can also keep checking over your performance metrics, use a ROC analysis, you can use confusion matrices, you can use precision recall curves. So just continuously obtaining that data and doing analyses of the data that you are getting. And obviously human oversight and review. So having healthcare professionals take a look at and approve the decisions that it's making. Having more transparency obviously will help them in reviewing the decisions that it's making. And this will also allow you to, if they're engaged and taking a look at that, that'll allow you to address those and realize those issues a bit sooner. So another example, or using the same example, but another case just focused on monitoring. So we have our diabetic retinopathy device again, and this time they use real data analysis. So they took a set of data that was already labeled and curated by ophthalmologists and basically used that as a reference standard and would compare the device's performance over time against that reference data set to make sure that it was still performing, that you weren't seeing drift, and that the algorithm, this is particular if the algorithm is not locked, that it's not trying to like retrain itself. They also use feedback loops. So healthcare professionals were giving feedback if it wasn't detecting rapidly enough, if it was giving inaccurate detection. So in this particular case, say it wasn't detecting a specific type of diabetic retinopathy enough, so non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So the developers then can say, okay, we need to train the AI a bit more to improve the accuracy within this subset of diabetic retinopathy. Alerting. So if, as I mentioned before, if you have an anomaly that says, for example, in this particular case, this is not what an ophthalmologist would typically diagnose the patient with, an alert can be generated so that the healthcare professional can then go back and look at what the algorithm did or how it made that decision. Again, transparency helps with that. And it can also, alerting can also help with cases that might require additional attention. So a high risk case or a progressing retinopathy, and giving that alert can have the physician kind of go into more detail into that particular patient situation in that patient's case to check the algorithm, but also to make sure that if the algorithm is correct, that the patient is receiving appropriate care. All right, and so addressing issues, who can help? So stakeholders, as I mentioned before, involving various stakeholders can help in making a better AI and reducing the risk as you move towards your regulatory clearance or approval. So getting healthcare professionals' expertise, they can give you inputs on the accuracy of it. Does it meet what they would expect it to meet? How is it usable? Can they interpret what it's saying? Are they able to use it? Do they want to use it? Patients and patient advocacy groups can provide feedback on their experience. They can also give insights into ethical concerns surrounding the patient population. They can also talk about how it has impacted their overall healthcare outcomes. Developers and researchers can use their technical expertise to optimize on the back end of things, so to improve the algorithms, to improve the data inputs. Regulatory folks and policymakers can continue to establish guidelines and standards. I've been working on the AAMI standards, and so there will be some coming out to help with this process overall. And then industry associations and professional organizations like can provide guidance. So like here we are today talking about how to improve the safety of AI out there in the real world. And that's my dog that has been sick. So then send her some good vibes because I really would love for her to get better. And so thank you for listening to me jabber on and stumble over my, oh my gosh, how ironic is that? Stumble over my words today. I appreciate your attendance.
Thanks, Isabella. Certainly, first and foremost, yeah, I hope your dog gets better. And there's a lot of tongue twisters out there today for you too.
I don't know. Maybe the stress with my dog is making my brain not work as normal. I don't know. Articulation is not on point.
So we in the chat you'll see I wrote in there, but for whoever's questions we don't get to, we will send those to Isabella for a response to send to you, right? So if you asked a question, we will get it answered. I just don't know if we're gonna have time right now. So Isabella, there's some questions that came in ahead of time. Honestly, some of them were more just like topic discussions, but there were some questions, and we had a handful of questions that came in live as well. So I will ask them and give me your rapid fire response, or take your time and we'll answer the ones later.
In what, 4 minutes, 3 minutes probably now?
Yeah. So
I will try to answer as many as I can via email as well.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Okay, so the first one is medical device is inherently skewed, or sorry, medical data is inherently skewed. A lot more negatives present to each positive case. How can we handle this inherently skewed data besides data normalization?
That's a good question. You see this, if I'm understanding the question well, you see this in vitro diagnostics a lot as well, particularly diagnostics in general, right? And so usually what you unfortunately ultimately have to do is have a larger data set for validation and training. And what I mentioned, you probably need to start curating that data set so that you understand the situations around the negative cases, that you don't have an overabundance of negative cases such that the algorithm thinks almost every situation is negative. And you probably are gonna just need to gather a lot more data in order to do so. When you go through validation, you're gonna have to have a large patient population within your validation to ensure that you have enough positives and enough, well, you'll have enough negatives, enough positives to get the sensitivity, specificity, PPV, NPV, if you're looking at likelihood ratios, things like that within that data set. I don't know if that answers the question. I think it does. But if not, feel free to shoot me an email.
Cool. According to the FDA, what is real-time AI? Does that mean that data acquisition is through an imaging modality?
I don't know if I understand that question.
Okay. All right. Let me skip to another one. And the person who asked that, if you want to get a clarifying answer, feel free to reach out to Isabella.
If you reach out to me and we can have a conversation, kind of elaborate on the question exactly. Sometimes it's just the phrasing of the question I'm not driving with.
Yeah, and the first question that was asked, the answer, the person wrote in, yes, thank you, when you asked if that answered the question. So, okay. Difference between locked and adaptive AI algorithms. Are real-time AI guidance systems classified under adaptive algorithms? I don't know if these are too granular or not, but.
I think I understand the question.
Okay.
So from a regulatory standpoint, it's much easier to get a clearance or approval with a locked algorithm, particularly as we don't have a lot of these standards established quite yet, particularly for adaptive algorithms, ones that are not locked and basically adaptive meaning adapting in real time, kind of continuously training, true form machine learning. It's not impossible to do that. It just is going to take a lot more conversation with FDA and a lot more understanding about the transparency surrounding the transparency of the algorithm, how the algorithm is generating those outputs. As I'm talking about it, I forgot what the question was exactly, Dwayne. But basically, what was the question exactly?
That's a good question. Hold on. You know, we'll have to come back to it. It disappeared on me. Yeah, yeah. Let me end on an easy one, Isabella,
Okay.
for you. And just for people who are still on, you could see the contact information for Proxima CRO. So it's a hello@proximacro.com for an email address. Are there any
Also,
other?
real quick,
Oh,
mine is Isabella@proximacro.com, so that's pretty easy to remember
wow.
if you want to
Yeah.
email directly.
Sweet. Yeah, anytime you get just a first name email, that's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Are there any other early engagements possible with FDA to get guidance for the clinical studies pertaining to AI? That's the question. I'm going to modify it a little bit. What is the best way to get FDA guidance on this?
Yeah, so if you're really early, I would probably have an informational meeting where you're educating them on your AI and how it does what it does and what it does. As you move forward, if you're seeking more feedback from them, I would engage in pre-sub meetings. If you have a breakthrough device designation, you can engage through sprint discussions with FDA, which would kind of be more of a back and forth than a pre-sub meeting. But any type of Q-sub process is really going to be helpful. You can always reach out via email to the review teams. Of course, anything that they tell you outside of the context of a Q-sub is not going to be binding in any way. But if you're just trying to meet with them and educate them on your product or get some general insight from them, that can be a good way to do so as well.
Awesome. Isabella, thank you so much. We're all pulling for your dog. Thanks for rescheduling this and still sharing the knowledge. It's a hot topic right now. Thanks to Galen Data for putting this on. You can see the information on Galen Data on the screen right now, contact information for them as well. These webinars are extremely valuable for the MedTech community and really giving back and sharing that knowledge. So Isabella, thank you for playing a part in that today. And thanks everyone for joining in, and stay tuned for our April webinar at the end of this month.